The homeland dommy reversey theory makes even more sense if Roger saw this on Laugh Tale and told everyone to become pirates so they won't be in their hometown. That's probably why Emu is so afraid of pirates more than anything, because it's very unlikely that dommy reversey will work on them unless you lure them to their homeland like they did with rocks. So in case you missed the chapter review, this comment is referring to an idea that I covered in that video, which is that dommy reversey may only work on people in the location that they were born, hence the name. Dommy reversey means I returned home. And now this is becoming a compound theory, suggesting that Roger may have purposely started the Great Age of Piracy to ensure that as few people as possible were actually located on their homeland. And I do really like the idea, as it explains why pirates are such a profound problem for the world government, as it would make them extremely difficult to deal with, as generally the very act of becoming a pirate would make one immune to being dommy reversed. So the world government, they're forced to deal with pirates in the traditional manner, rather than just conquering the planet with sinister silhouette magic. But it also makes sense from the perspective of Emu's overall plan, the construction of Mu's world. Because what's happened with the global flooding is isolating different lands and different cultures onto these little teeny tiny, some very big islands, but making it as difficult as possible to leave one's homeland, as well as terrifying and undesirable, with all of the legends about the Grand Line being the pirate's graveyard, etc. And then from Emu's POV, if any one of these singular islands ever dared act out of turn, then all he has to do is rock up a dommy reversey and problem solved. So I would love it if Roger strategically implemented a counter to that by inspiring people to explore the world and using the promise of the One Piece to get them to conquer any fears or concerns they would otherwise have about leaving their homelands. And it also gives a pretty damn good excuse for our hefty roster of absentee fathers in the series, leaving their homelands and never seeing their kids because it would leave them vulnerable to be being dommy reversed. But I think that that's where this idea might start to go a bit too far. But look, unless Emu has some sort of memory wiping ability, we do now live in a world where pretty much every major figure knows that not only Emu exists, but that dommy reversey exists. And so they may very well be structuring their lives around that. Rayleigh might live on Sabadi because he can't go back to wherever his home was, and the same thing for Scopogaban taking up spelunking on Elbaf, and perhaps in some sort of artsy, wanksy, feel-good way, the dawn of the world is going to include the ability to go home without worrying about turning into a scary demon. I think I finally understand this backstory. It is about the two men most important to Loki, his idol Rox and his father Harold. Both are men who wanted to change the world in their own ways, and both failed, and the world, brackets Emu, destroyed them, and Loki in the chapter he was introduced declared that he would destroy the world. That's correct. As deep as we are into this God Valley stuff, ultimately what we are doing here is all of this is to define Loki. One side of Loki's story is influenced by Rox, and the other side is influenced by Harold. And the most interesting thing here is whether or not they're going to meet the same fate, as it's also being commonly speculated that Harold didn't go mad with bloodlust, instead he was a dommy reversed, and it was in that state that Loki was forced to kill him. Although if I understand Oda correctly, he usually creates contrasting figures for the purpose of contrast. So take Otohime and Fisher Tiger as an example. I love this example because they both die in more or less the same way, being shot with vicious death bullets. But the point of contrast that Oda wanted to create was Fisher Tiger dying consumed by hatred and resentment for humans, whilst Otohime died with no hatred or resentment whatsoever, not even for the person who killed her. And a lot of Fishman Island turned into, well, which legacy are we going to follow? Or are we going to take parts from both and create a new legacy? And look, I don't know how this plays out yet because I am not anyone really. But however it is that Rox ends up dying, I would assume that Harold's death is going to represent the inverse of that, which I guess we'll get more into when Rox does die, which is looking like maybe next week or the chapter after that, but it's definitely coming real soon. That's when we'll learn the truth, as one of the primary goals of One Piece is of course to uncover the true history of of the world, which has been hidden because history is powerful and history is engaging, and that is why the sponsor of this video is Heroes of History, a strategic city builder where you forge your own path through history, starting at the Stone Age and heading on into the far, far future, collecting heroes as you go to assemble history's greatest of crews, such as King Leonidas, Joan of Arc, Albert Einstein, and many, many more. This is a game that I like to call stress-free strategy. It's easy to start, it is incredibly fun to master, and most importantly, this game respects the crap out of your time, and I like my time. It's great for short sessions with long progression, and contains a surprising degree of depth as well as satisfaction in building and evolving your city, as well as trying out all sorts of crazy combinations of historical figures, like what happens when you send Marie Curie and Vincent van Gogh into battle combat against Nikola Tesla. It's pretty ridiculously addictive as well. It has that beautiful, just one more bull feel about it, and I'm personally very engaged by the art style. It has this perfect, clean, but vibrant and charming aesthetic that always makes me want to see more of this world. And just as an aside, I was genuinely late in making this video because I got a bit too carried away playing the campaign of Heroes of History, which is the entire point, and if you want to get carried away through time, then you can and should download Heroes of History by clicking my link in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen. Definitely give it a go. I've been having too much fun with this one. But for now, it's back to you, me. Thanks, me. If I remember correctly, Imu has never called Luffy by his real name, but only as Joy Boy, and now he refers to rocks as Davy Jones. Perhaps a major part of their character is that they are stuck in the past, unable to or even refusing to move on. So this is a fun detail that was a bit easily forgotten even at the time, but when relieving Saint Saturn from the burden of life, a furious Imu asked why he allowed Joy Boy to escape. Joy Boy meaning Luffy. So even though Emmett corrected himself, what Imu sees when he looks at Luffy is Joy Boy, and what he apparently saw when looking at rocks was Davy Jones. And so what I really want to see now is Imu confronting Blackbeard, as Blackbeard was one of the 3 bounty posters that Imu had collected alongside Luffy and Shirahoshi's, and I do wonder if Imu would now refer to Blackbeard as Davy Jones should that will have been inherited. However, there is an important exception to this pattern, and that exception's name is Vivi. When Imu said that he desired Vivi, very notably, he said Vivi rather than Lily, despite the fact that we know the reason why Imu is so fixated on Vivi is because she is a physical copy of Lily. Now, if I wanted to give some reasoning as to why this is, and I do, so I will, it would be because this was an order to the 5 elders. And if Imu had said, I desire Lily, then the 5 elders would have gone, what the crap is the Great One talking about? I don't know any Lily. Because we don't know if any of the elders were even alive during the Void Century. They all could have been collected later. So it does make practical sense to call her Vivi, even if Imu does see her as Lily. Considering Garp's actions, I wonder if the title Hero of the Marines wasn't created by Sengoku to protect him from Imu's retaliation. It's a lot harder and more suspicious to make a symbol disappear than a regular Marine. Right, I like this. And previously, I was thinking that it was the world government who did this in order to cover up Imu's presence, like how they tried to credit Smoker for Crocodile's defeat to hide Luffy's involvement. But with Garp attacking Imu in a very Luffy-like manner, this is obviously a death-worthy offense, and I think it's going to take some serious action to save Garp in this situation. And Sengoku, yes, he could be part of the answer to that. But I do have another figure in mind. One of the ways that I can see the world government sparing Garp at this point, which we know that they do, but it would be if Big News Morgans published an article labeling Garp as the hero of the Marines. Because once the whole world views Garp with that status, it turns him into a symbol, and it would make it impossible for the world government to quietly get rid of him. So maybe Sengoku, very smart, again, he is credited as being, I think, the smartest tactician in all of One Piece. Sengoku comes up with a cunning plan, and even though he doesn't have the power and influence of an admiral or fleet admiral, he's not there yet, he still uses what connections he does have to feed a bird a fake story about what happened. One that claims that Garp single-handedly protected the world nobles, and the story spreads out of control before the world government can punish Garp for his insolence. If the others fought rocks whilst trying to stop him from killing Eris and Teach, maybe Teach saw that and mistook it for betrayal, which caused him to betray Whitebeard and everything else he did. And mate, he did a lot of other else's. So sure, that could be it. If figures like Roger, Garp, and Whitebeard, nobly teamed up to defend Teach, Teach could have ended up mistaking that for attacking his father. Why are you hitting my dad. And he, in his, I think, 2-year-old wisdom, could use that moment to vow revenge on each and every one of them. Personally, I do hope there's a lot more to it than just that, though. I'm not hugely keen on the main antagonist of all of One Piece existing due to a soap opera style misunderstanding, but that could absolutely be a part of it. Rock's calling Imu the Rat King is quite interesting. I wonder how the official translation will translate this, as this will spawn so many theories. Yes, this could be one of those lines that unlocks a whole new level of understanding, or it could be one of those lines that is absolutely meaningless. But first, I should say that Rat Kings do exist in the real world. They're a thing. It's what happens when a group of rats that get their tails all tangled together and they effectively become a single entity. And it would be interesting if that is how Rox views the world government or the world nobles, as a group of sewer rats who have become so grotesquely entangled in one another, which is kind of true in the case of the Elder Stars and the Holy Knights. Imu and the Elders are able to communicate telepathically, share minds, share abilities, and all of their bodies seem to effectively be extensions of Imu's abilities and therefore body. And the more I think about it, the more that designating them as some sort of Rat King does make a lot of sense. But it could also refer to the traitor meaning of rat, in the same way that we love to reference Rat Shanks. Saint Imu Nerona was one of the 20 founding kings, and yet only Saint Imu Nerona now sits upon the empty throne, implying that he possibly could have betrayed the other 19 kings and took that sweet, delicious powers for himself. And in which case, sure, you could refer to Imu as a Rat King. Imu's dommy reversi might only work on people fueled by hatred, despair, or negative thoughts. That's why Joy Boy terrifies them so much. His power isn't just strength, it is joy itself. You can't reverse or control someone who radiates pure freedom and laughter. And this is the other primary idea, and I believe that it also currently tracks. Initially, I thought this was less likely because Dory and Broggy, they are such joy-fueled individuals, but going back on chapter 1150, mate, they were furious with Imu, specifically about all of the child hostages that the Holy Knights took, and they are so much more angry than we've ever seen them before, and yes, that could have left them vulnerable. A bit of Star Wars theory, anger fueling your path to the dark side. And thematically, this does work very well with the Holy Knights, because they're not just out to complete a mission. They could have done that ages ago. What their goal is to make their victims feel as much despair and negativity as possible. And so that could play into Imu's abilities. The Holy Knights are sort of like emissaries of generating the prerequisite for Imu's ability to happen. Although I'm not sure how well it works with the reversi aspect of the ability, the whole game idea, as not every giant who's being caught within the reversi has had that same level of fury or negativity, but perhaps I'm just reading into it wrong and they are all feeling fear, despair, and all of the other bad emotions. And if this was true, then yes, the natural counter to all of this would be Luffy. Well, you know what? Not even Luffy. We don't necessarily need Luffy. We just need anyone who is able to conquer those feelings. And I will admit that this is 100% complete cope at this point, but just stick with me and imagine, if you will, a situation where Usopp is put in a position to be dommy reversied, theoretically the easiest target of any Straw Hat due to his overwhelming negativity, but somehow Usopp manages to conquer those emotions and becomes the first person to resist Imu's power. And that way he wouldn't necessarily even need to do anything like get a power up or defeat a strong opponent. It would just be a true showing of inner strength. But again, I think I might be expecting a bit too much from Usopp in this arc. I do hope that Oda gives him something though, because otherwise being on Elbaf, it is going to be such a huge missed opportunity to finish a story that started on Little Garden, where Usopp was forced to be brave and act on his own when the rest of his crew were captured and or just chilling in some wax house kicking some birds and some otters. I think Captain John must get at least some of the treasure, leading to Captain John's treasure that Buggy was looking for. You are 100% correct, didn't even think about that. Buggy spent most of his time in pre-time skip One Piece looking for Captain John's legendary hidden treasure, which Luffy gave him the key to during Impel Down, and we don't actually know if Buggy found the treasure. For quite some time, I assumed that he did because I thought that's how he was paying all of his mercenaries, but it turned out that that was a loan from Crocodile. But I suppose if Captain John's treasure was ever so legendary, then he probably does escape God Valley with a fair few chests to say the least. I'm surprised no one else mentioned Whitebeard's named attack. Yes, in this chapter, Whitebeard used a named attack. Now, why is that such a big deal, you ask? It's because, weirdly enough, in all of his appearances in One Piece 2 now, Whitebeard has never said the names of any of his attacks. He just performed them in silence like the Chad he is. All of his attacks do have names, but they come from external sources. In fact, they mostly come from games, I think, so they're not really, actually, they're not at all canon. And you can tell that from this very chapter, because Whitebeard's named attack is Shattering Void. It's not a new attack. We've seen him use it before, but the game has named it Gekishin, meaning severe earthquake, but that is no longer the truth, and probably never was. Can we please talk about how Captain John looks like Basil Hawkins, acts like Scratchman Apu, and has kids devil fruit? No. Rox did promise to come back for Emu in the flower room near the beginning of the flashback. Was that the promise that he meant? It could be. In chapter 1155, when Rox infiltrated Marijois, he told Emu that he'd be back, and that's not necessarily a promise, but it could be what Rox is referring to in this chapter, and it could also have a double meaning. Because if Rox is only targeting Emu, only targeting the world because of the legacy of Davy Jones, then Rox's words on Marijois could be a mini promise that's part of this bigger promise of Davy Jones. Man on the Intinit, what? Not only did you call Garling Shamrock, but you also seem to forget that Blackbeard was born at Shadeport, not God Valley, unless Shadeport is on God Valley, but we don't know that yet. Alright, yeah. Look, geez, I had a shocking run in the last video, so just to clarify, what I have right is a debilitating, horrible condition of thinking of young Garling as Shamrock. What I see with young Garling is I see a bad Shanks, and so my mind defaults to Shamrock, which never happens with older Garling. He's always just Garling. It just happens with younger Garling because he looks like a bad Shanks, and a bad Shanks is a Shamrock. But with the Blackbeard mistake, it's actually a lot worse than you may think. I implied in the last chapter that he was born on God Valley, but what I was actually trying to say was Lucia, because that's where Eris seems to be from, but that is also wrong because Shadeport is Blackbeard's birthplace, which, because it's a port, could be anywhere, just like how Rocky Port is part of Hachinosu. So TLDR, my brain wasn't working, and to be completely honest with you, with my advanced age, I don't know if that's ever going to get better. I could be wrong, but I think it's been years since we've had a true double page like that, meaning one without any side/insert panels. It's actually been more recent than you may think, but this is referring, of course, to the 6v1 double page spread. And the weird thing about One Piece that you don't necessarily consciously pick up on is that Oda almost never draws full-on double page spreads. What he tends to do is draw these quasi double page spreads where one giant panel takes up about 75% of the space, and then he stuffs the remaining 25% with a ton of panels just to keep the momentum going. But that's not what happened in this chapter. Chapter 1163 featured a very clean, single, double page spread of everyone attacking Emu. And I believe that the last time this happened was actually quite recently in chapter 1138 with the Elbaf mural, which was of course a special occasion. And before that, I believe it was chapter 1110 with the first appearance of the true 5 Elder Stars. But to give you an idea of how rare this is, the last instance prior to that was Dressrosa with the formation of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. So it's happened at a much higher rate in recent years. By higher rate, I mean it's happened like 3 times in 3 years. And I think that Oda doesn't like to do these pure double page spreads because they are very expensive manga real estate. The dude has such a big story to tell and he's got to keep things going. So losing even a single page, that becomes a big deal momentum wise. Because if you do something like that every chapter, you do a clean double page spread and you sacrifice a page, then over time you are going to lose tens, or in the case of One Piece, maybe even 100 chapters worth of space that you could have been filling. And that's one of the main secrets as to why One Piece feels so substantive, because Oda really maximizes the space that he has without sacrificing the impact of what those double page spreads are supposed to do. Mr. Internet, there's an interesting line. Moo's world is incomplete. What if the thing that makes it incomplete is just One Piece? Ah, I see what you did there. And also, maybe, In this chapter, Mr. Mu does state that his world is incomplete, and there are a number of reasons as to why this could be. The first is that the world obviously hasn't been completely flooded yet. There's still a bunch of lands with people living on them. And if I was some sort of sea god, then I would want to be getting rid of all of that. Another reason could be that the world is incomplete because members of the Will of D still exist, and Imu very clearly desires to purge all but one of them. We can keep Vivi, but get rid of the rest. Because you can't have demons in heaven, you know, that sort of logic. And another could be what we previously mentioned with Lily. If Imu turns out to be a particularly sentimental silhouette, then he may consider the world incomplete without Lily by his side. Because in the end, what good is global domination, no matter how moist it may be, without a blue-haired baddie by your side? It's not good at all. But you feel free to let me know what you think will complete Mu's world in the comments below.